Pleasure to introduce my old friend, Alan Krueger. Alan and I were long before he was the chair of the Council of Economic Advisors. We knew that was coming. He was in graduate school with me. He was the most distinguished member of our graduate school class at Harvard, and has been both a leader in labor economics, in doing randomized evaluations in the US in the case of education, in promoting rational, intelligent policymaking in the US and by extension everywhere in the world. Alan is one of the leading lights of the economics profession, and we're very glad to have him here. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you. Thank you.
So Alan, coming from well, right now, I guess you're no longer there, but you're surrounded by people, not necessarily from your party, who absolutely do get their messages from God. They say, at least they say they're getting it from God. You know.
So, I'm glad you added not necessarily. Yeah.
You must have, I mean, you come from an academic, extremely successful academic background. You come with all these ideas. What's the encounter with the governance process like? I mean, you walk in, you know the results from RCT, results from many other of your studies. How do people react to evidence? You have all the credibility in the world. We believe what you write.
Well, let me begin by congratulating J. Paul. And as a non-development economist, I think J. Paul's contributions to the economics profession are truly impressive, and I hope they spread beyond development economics. I did a little bit of homework for this panel, and I went through my calendar, and I tried to quantify, this was not scientific, but it was systematic, quantify all of the policy issues that I worked on in my job as the president's chief economist, and then say, in how many of these did we actually bring some evidence to the discussion on the policy formation? In how many of these instances was it academics who generated the evidence as opposed to my staff or the staff at Treasury or the Fed or elsewhere? What fraction of time was the gold standard of randomized controlled trials available? And then, if it wasn't available, would it have been feasible? So let me share with you some of my findings. And these were really, I have to say, surprising to me when I got the spreadsheet up and running. And this looks at policies from small business administration, lending policy, to financial reform, to tax policy, job training, and so on. In the vast majority of cases from within the administration, evidence was brought to bear on the problem. And I was struck by that. Now, there were many problems where it wasn't much evidence, or the evidence wasn't as germane to the whole issue that was being considered as one would like. So I kind of weighted. I weighted how much evidence was used, 0 to 1, and it was over half, in the vicinity of just north of a half. The evidence using this weighting scheme, about 40% was generated by researchers outside the government. What about randomized trials? About 10%. So of the 60 policy issues that I identified, I would say in about 10% of the cases there was randomized trials evidence. Sometimes it was really clear, like job training, where we have a long history of doing evaluations. Others, it was a bit tangential, like disability insurance and ticket to work, which was a small part of what we were looking at in disability insurance. But then what really surprised me is, because a lot of what I worked on was kind of beyond the boundaries of past policies. It was the middle of the financial crisis, and we were, I think, looking at brand new things. In almost half the cases, I say 40 to 50% overall, it would have been feasible to enrich the space of evidence with randomized trials, which struck me that it was so high, because a lot of issues were macroeconomic, where you're not going to vary having a financial crisis.
Not yet.
And I also, let's hope not. I have to say, I think that most of the relevant evidence was used within the administration. I would be very surprised if I come across many academic studies now where I say, I wish I knew about that because that would have influenced how we thought about a particular issue. Now, this is just saying that the evidence was used. The evidence didn't necessarily prevail. It didn't necessarily prevail within the administration, although people always took it seriously. And then, of course, if you do prevail within the administration, like we had a very good proposal for tax credit for companies that expanded employment, when it goes up to Congress, it gets contorted. And obviously, political considerations weigh in heavily at that stage. And I would prefer to think of this as evidence-influenced policy rather than evidence-based, because in a democracy, we want those other considerations to be reflected. And we had a couple of innovations which I think will help to bring more evidence to bear on US economic policy making. For one, every department is now required to have a position like a chief evaluation officer, high-ranking position. Labor Department was the first one to do it with Gene Grossman. And then secondly, when it comes to budgeting, Jeff Zients issued a memo requesting all of the agencies to present evidence in their budget requests, saying that we would look more favorably upon submissions which included evidence. And also we launched a series of seminars which the Council of Economic Advisors and OMB ran with the agencies about how to generate randomized evaluations, more evidence. It doesn't have to be randomized either. There are a lot of situations where just having survey data would have been helpful. So I do have one suggestion, and maybe this is for J. Paul North America. When I was at Treasury Department and at the Council of Economic Advisors, I often felt like I had more tools for doing research as a Princeton professor. I run the survey center at Princeton. If I wanted to generate a survey, I could do that easily. It's not so easy to do that from within the government. It takes a long time. I think it would be very helpful if we had some kind of an institution, and J-PAL could be a home for this, which talked to different agencies and said, we want to sponsor some research. Tell us what's useful for you. We could collaborate on it. We could go out there and get this done. Because a lot of the work, there's not that high a reward for academics to do it, or they're not aware of it because the policy process moves so quickly. Trying to collaborate more, learn more about what are the issues on the plate of the academics, on the plate of the policymakers, because I think there is a market failure. A lot of the work that's done in academia is not of any immediate value. Maybe it's in long-run value in some cases, although I suspect a minority. Yet there's tremendous demand within the government to try to learn more about what works.
So just to pursue that a little bit more, what was the sensitivity to the quality of the evidence in the government? Was, when you are you go to Obama and say, this is a randomized control system, oh, gee, that's great? Or, just how does it work?
I viewed my job, and the president said that he relies on the Council of Economic Advisors to provide him objective, unvarnished evidence about what will do the most good for the most people in the country. So I viewed my job as trying to aggregate the evidence, say where it's an agreement, where it's compelling, and where it's not. And I remember one of the first meetings I had with the president, and I said, Mr. President, the evidence here is not dispositive. And then he said, when is it ever dispositive in economics, which is a fair jibe. And this was a case where it really was particularly non-dispositive. So I think people do recognize that there are more compelling studies than others. And I think they do take that into account. Now, it doesn't mean it's going to trump other considerations. And there is, as both of the previous speakers mentioned, there is something of a conflict when it comes to some of the agencies where they don't want evidence out in the public if it's not supportive. We had a wonderful randomized control experiment in the US done in the earlier in the 2000s of the Job Corps program. It was probably $60 million Mathematica study where 16,000 participants were randomly assigned to Job Corps. The results were mixed. The Labor Department sat on them for at least 3 years. I got a copy of the report when I was writing for the New York Times and wrote it up in the newspaper, which is how it got released. So one of the things which is included in the memorandum that Jeff Zients issued is that the agencies have to release the analysis that they're doing. Because there is a conflict of interest. Even in the Bush administration, which was not necessarily a fan of job training programs, the administrator of that program kind of identified with the program. But by and large, I would say those who are forming the policy want it to be effective. They want to get it right. And even those who have more political antenna, or only political antenna, they want to know where the criticism's going to come from. So they are interested in the evidence. And this is aside from what when Michael said policy-based evidence. Evidence is used a lot in selling the policy. I tried to abstract from that and just think about the policy formation. But when it comes to selling the policy, people certainly want to know which evidence is supportive.